Committee on State and Local Government will come to order. It is 12:35, Thursday, March 20th, 2025. The first item on the agenda is Senate File 856, Senator Gustafson. And we do have quorum.
There's one right here.
Welcome Senator Gustafson and Senator Kroon to the state and Senator Kroon to the State and Local Government Committee. Whenever you guys are ready, you may proceed with your presentation on Senate File 856.
Thank you, Tujang. We also have an amendment. Do you want to do that first, or should I describe the bill first?
Up to you.
I think we could pass it, and I'm happy to explain it once.
Certainly. Yeah. Senator Gustafson moves was it A3? A43? Mm-hmm. Senator Gustafson moves the A43 amendment. All those in favor say aye. All right. All opposed say no. The amendment is adopted. Senator Gustafson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, and thank you for the opportunity to present this bill again and come back to state local government. Senate File 856 establishes the Independent Office of Inspector General. It enhances accountability, transparency, and oversight of public funds in Minnesota. And from the outset, this bill has been ensuring that every taxpayer dollar is used effectively, responsibly, and that fraud, misuse are swiftly identified and addressed. Throughout the process, we have engaged with stakeholders from across agencies, including MMB, DHS, DCYF, and the OLA, to refine this legislation. In response to concerns raised by the bill's structure, jurisdiction, and implementation, we have made significant revisions that provide stronger oversight while preserving necessary safeguards and agency responsibilities. Some of the key changes addressing these concerns is clarified jurisdiction and agency roles, stronger collaboration and oversight, increased transparency in the appointment process, maintaining administrative integrity. And all of this matters because Minnesotans expect strong accountability with how public funds are used. This bill builds on our commitment to prevent fraud before it happens or to catch it very quickly, while making sure that our agencies can function effectively in their proper jurisdictions. These amendments make it clear that oversight and efficiency are not competing interests. They are necessary partners in good governance. We look forward to the discussion, and I'd also like to thank my co-authors, Senator Draheim, Senator Putnam, Senator Latz, and of course, Senator Kroon for co-presenting with me today.
Thank you, Senator Gustafson. Senator Kroon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. The bill has changed since the last time we were here, and that is to be expected. The reason for the changes is that this is a big bill. We're making a big change in Minnesota with the addition of this Office of Inspector General, and we are talking to nearly everybody. And with that comes good ideas that we are incorporating into the bill, including from stakeholders, from agencies, and other members. There's been numerous bipartisan and bicameral meetings that are resulting in really good ideas and changes to the bill. And I look forward to participating in this hearing and continuing to be a part of this bipartisan effort to establish an Office of Inspector General and to clamp down on fraud in Minnesota. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Kroon. Members of the committees, any questions or comments to the bill or the amendments? Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to thank Senator Gustafson and Senator Kroon also for his help on the bill. I know a number of members have had input into it, and Senator Gustafson, you're doing a really good job trying to navigate an unknown channel here, or an unknown body of water. So thank you for your work. I did look at the amendment, and I know you're working with the legislative auditor and trying to work to delineate the responsibilities so that we don't have overlap between those agencies, and some of this amendment does that. And I think there's some really good things that you include in that amendment and in the bill coming forward. And I do know as well there's more work to do. So thank you both for your work, and that's all I have, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Drazkowski. Senator McQuaid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just hoping we could hear about the amendment.
Senator Gustafson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if you look at the amendment, I'll just go section by section here. 1.2 through 1.4 of the amendment authorizes the OLA to coordinate with the OIG in reviews and investigations. 1.5 through 1.6 adds current and former governors and legislators to the list of people who can't be appointed to be the Inspector General. 1.7 through 1.8 required a hearing by the Legislative Inspector General Advisory Commission before removal of the Chief Administrative Law Judge. 1.9, one change of several in this amendment that eliminates some of the restrictions on the OIG's authority to investigate fraud and misuse involving certain programs under the Department of Human Services and Department of Children, Youth, and Families. I'll note at this one that it does not change the jurisdiction of those agencies, nor does it intrude on their abilities to do what they need to do within their agencies. It just gives access to the Inspector General should they request it. The 110 through 112 and 16, 20, 25, that is a changing in verb tense. 1.13 through 15 clarifies language to focus on fraud and misuse. 1.21 through 2.4, and then again through 2.6 and 2.7, it gives the OIG the option to seek a court order to stop distribution of money or an alert an agency head on emergency basis when fraud is suspected, and to provide notice to relevant law enforcement agencies. 1.28 through 2.9 eliminates a requirement that the OIG provide sufficient information to requesting agency to allow the agency to exercise its statutory obligations to stop fraud. 2.1 through 2.3 replaces a list of carve-outs to the OIG's authority and replaces it with clarification on the roles of the agency. This again just gives authorization for the OIG to be able to have access to investigations and still preserving what the agency's jurisdictions and powers and duties are. It also has the OIG in investigating certain topics, the Department of Human Services, Medicaid fraud investigations, Department of Youth and Family Services, Child Care Assistance Program, Department of Health, WIC, and food support programs. 2.24 through 2.25 eliminates unnecessary listing of types of staff, and 2.26 to the end makes changes to the substance of authorized interagency agreements on shared investigations. It allows the agency and the OIG to coordinate investigation efforts as necessary or practical. Some of this might be fiscal reasons as well, so that they're not both spending money where one or the other could just be spending it. Precludes the agreements inhibiting the OIG's authority to investigate.
Thank you, Senator Gustafson, for the overview of the amendment here. Senator McQuaid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had two questions for you, Senator Gustafson. The first is, I know that you all have been doing a ton of meetings on this, and sometimes when you spend hours and you arrive at language and then someone brings up the thing you started talking about after, that made hours of meetings. So if this has already been talked about, you can just tell me. Is there, I'm looking at the 1.5 and 1.6 of the amendment. Was there any conversation about candidates for governor or legislators as well? Obviously, that would broaden the pool, I guess, by double. But I've just been thinking about that, I guess, is maybe another way to put it.
Thank you, Senator McQuaid. To Senator Gustafson or Senator Kroon on the question for line 1.5 to 1.6. Is that correct, Senator McQuaid? Yeah. Senator Gustafson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator McQuaid. It's a good question. I think as we were kind of looking at that, a lot of it just really had to do with independence and trying to make this office as nonpartisan as possible. And so we didn't want anybody who was, using it as a stepping stone to run for office, and we certainly didn't want anybody who was just in office to then all of a sudden be somebody who's supposed to be independent. And so we didn't broaden it outside of that, but there are good questions about that, that I guess, we haven't had that specific question, so, yeah.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Kroon?
Thank you,
Anything
Mr.
to add?
Chair. I think it's a good question, too. I think the one safeguard that we have to ensure that candidates or even former candidates for governor wouldn't be seriously considered for this position is the makeup of the commission that would be establishing the finalists would be a bipartisan, 2 members from each caucus in the legislature, and it would take a majority vote. So it'd be pretty unlikely that they would pass through to the finalists for consideration, a partisan politician that identifies with one party or another.
Thank you. Senator McQuaid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I think that's what came to my mind as well. The thing I just keep thinking of is there's so many people who have run for office, and you find out 20 years ago they ran for office, and it might not be like a prevalent part of their resume. And so maybe, I'm not going to try to amend your bill on the fly, but it might be worth considering putting in something that has run for or held a partisan office or something like that. That could be one way to do it. Maybe throw in members of Congress and senators, I guess, too. And then my other question was about this, the part on Human Services, Department of Children, Youth and Families, and Department of Health. We had a really robust conversation in the Human Services Committee about these multiple layers and the investigatory authority and that kind of stuff. And so I guess I'm still a little bit interested in this idea that we have so for example, we would have the Department of Human Services investigating Medicaid fraud and the Attorney General, because I think they have to refer it there, and then we would have the OIG. And I'm just wondering about, is there coordination? I don't know. I guess I'm just interested in having 3 different investigations and how that might work, and if that might be actually worse and not, it's that Spider-Man one, they're all pointing at each other. And it's like, weren't you supposed to do that? And if we have more people, it's actually less oversight.
Thank you. Senator Gustafson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Senator McQuaid. I think you're right. We were very cautious about that. The word I think that tripped us up at the last committee we were at was the word jurisdiction, which sort of made it seem as if, when we think of jurisdiction, it's like you can't come within these lines or whatever. And that was sort of the troubling piece of it. And that I think you're right in that it makes it seem as if there would be 3 different agencies or offices. That's not what we're hoping that this language sort of clears that up, that we do not intend that, if this were to go forward and the Office of Inspector General were to be in place, it is not that they would be then a third boss for them. It gives them access as necessary. So if you look at the amendment, like 2.7 through 2.9, for example, Department of Human Services has primary responsibility to investigate fraud in the Medicaid program. That's their job. That's what their powers and duties are. That's their primary responsibility. But the Inspector General's office would have the authority to conduct independent investigation related to Medicaid fraud if necessary. So only if they felt as if there was a need for them to come in and assist. Part of the problem, I think, and with some of the concerns that we're seeing, is that there isn't somebody who's currently in office to be able to say exactly what their job would look like or what they need. So we have like the OLA who can sort of come in and say, yeah, that's not what we do, or here's what our typical day is. And we don't have an IG who can explain what that office will set up like. But what it's meant to do is just help and assist when necessary, but it is part of the role of this office to also have the ability to have full access to an investigation if they needed it. Not that to intrude, but just to have that access to keep people accountable, if that makes sense.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Kroon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's a good question, and it was a good conversation in the previous committee. I think what we're trying to do, with the 843 amendment, is to kind of thread that line so that you don't have multiple agencies thinking they're supposed to be doing the same thing. So that's where the primary responsibility language comes in. But we removed the provisions that would limit the jurisdiction of the Office of Inspector General, so that there is some redundancy, and I think that's okay. I think that's good, as long as each office knows what their primary responsibilities are without limiting jurisdiction. That's the goal.
Thank you, Senator Kroon. Senator McQuaid?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Senator Kroon, I think you're being very kind to say that that discussion was good in the previous committee. But that's really helpful. And I think then my only other question related to that section in the amendment before we vote on it, do we need to, it might be somewhere else in this bill, do we need to clarify that the OIG has access then to all of the information of these programs in order to conduct independent investigations? And then my second part of that question is, are there any, because I believe I remember hearing this too, is, for example, Department of Human Services, if there's Medicaid fraud, they have to refer it to the Attorney General. Is there a referral requirement, an alerting requirement, a disclosure requirement between these departments and the OIG? I just want to understand how what their responsibilities might be.
Thank you, Senator McQuaid. Senator Gustafson or Senator Kroon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is in here. I just don't know what line, so I'm desperately scanning through the bill here. So and if council knows quicker than I do, I would welcome their response. Otherwise, just take a moment, I can find it for you.
Certainly. Is that okay with you, Senator
Yeah,
McQuaid?
oh yeah.
Madam Chair and Senator McQuade, the data practices provisions have some provisions related to allowing access to data, starting at line 7.25, for example. And yeah, I think that's the main part.
Senator McQuaid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. James. That's super helpful. And I never saw the federal law that they were referring to about where things have to be housed. Is somebody having access to that data a violation of that?
Mr. Chair,
Senator Gustafson.
Senator McQuaid, we probably will have a little bit more of a data change, but I don't think it's going to be, nothing we have done so far, and correct me if I'm wrong, would compromise any of the federal payments or funding based on what this would do. I was also going to point out, Mr. Chair, that one of your questions too is also on 5.8, 5.9 of the bill, not the amendment, but that refers matters for civil, criminal, or administrative action by the BCA and Attorney General's office and other appropriate authorities. So they can also recommend legislative or policy changes, and there is a path forward for when an investigation concludes.
Thank you, Senator Gustafson. Senator McQuaid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just promised you I wouldn't work on this outside of committee, and I just want to have all the T's crossed, I's dotted. That is for the second part of my question about the referrals. That's for the OIG to the Attorney General's office or BCA, but do the departments then have a requirement to refer to the OIG? So if you're in the Department of Human Services, you suspect or find, evidence of potential Medicaid fraud, I believe the law right now is you have to refer it to the Attorney General for investigation. Is there a new requirement that they have to also refer to the OIG? Do they have to disclose to the OIG? Is there should they? I just want to know what the rules of the road would be.
Senator Gustafson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you're talking specifically about DHS and their internal inspector general, they would handle that. And it's, again, the IG would have access to that investigation. They would, the commissioner would probably submit a report to them as well. We have that available in the bill, but they're not required to refer it to them. They can do that on their own. They can send it to the Attorney General on their own.
Thank you, Senator Gustafson. Senator McQuaid.
I'll pause there, Mr. Chair, and let other folks ask questions.
Certainly. Any other member questions or comments? Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Senator McQuaid's questions are good ones, and having worked on this bill with Senator Gustafson and Kroon and others, I think we need to make sure, Senator McQuaid, that we have those appropriate communications. Another idea that came out that is not in the amendment or the bill is maybe even to put, to require each agency to have a link on their website to the OIG office in order to bring any tips in, those types of things. So that's not in the bill or the amendment, but that's some of the discussion we've had as well. But then also to avoid duplication with OLA, and then there's also parts, I think, in the amendment, if I remember reading, about coordination between the OLA and the OIG in ways that don't have redundancy, but have communication and cooperation. That's kind of, I think, Senator Gustafson's goal that she has had, and I'm just pleased with the work. This is really a good step forward on the amendment, I think, in those regards. Some of us have been meeting on this bill, been struggling with a lot of those. I think you got the snowplow through part of the drift, Senator Gustafson.
Senator Gustafson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just, I appreciate and I understand that this bill is still, even as we sit here in its final committee stops, but still has a couple more to go, and it is a work in progress. And I just want to reiterate that it is a careful needle to thread to make sure that we are not intruding where we shouldn't be, but also making sure that the OIG is a true OIG and has that independent oversight authority. So we know that there may be like a few more tweaks as we work forward, but again, we continue to have several meetings a week with all the agencies and stakeholders, and we will continue to do that until the bill is right. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Gustafson. Senator Drazkowski or Senator McQuaid? Thank you. And then Senator Gustafson, for some of the changes that was added afterwards, you know, like the powers and duties requiring the maintenance of an exclusion list. Could you go over that a little bit for us and kind of how what the thought process behind that was? Because I think one of the big changes that the OIG was created for was the ability to freeze or seize funds if, you know, there were discrepancies or issues that we are concerned about. So maybe you can enlighten us a little bit on this portion of the changes. Senator Kroon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll let
Senator
Senator Kroon start, and I'll fill in any gaps.
All right, Senator Kroon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The exclusion list that you're referring to in the fifth engrossment, I'm assuming line 5.24, refers back to subpart 7 when it's talking about alerting commissioners or heads of agencies of an emergency and recommending them to freeze or cease distribution of funds. That exclusion list would be, my interpretation of this would be the list that they've identified, the program's identified to cease funds from. So I think the amendment then adds an additional option to not just recommend to the agency, but to also seek a court order. So there's two different avenues now that the Office of Inspector General could pursue if there was an emergency need to freeze funds in a particular situation. They could recommend that to the agency head, or they could seek a court order.
Thank you. And Senator Gustafson, anything else?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I agree.
Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I won't belabor it, but to that point, Mr. Chair, if you want to hear the bill, I've got a bill that emulates the what the federal government does, and they've got a do not pay list. And so this includes federal agencies. I think there's 5 or 6 of them that they're required in the federal government to these agencies to contribute data to that list of, for instance, dead people, which is a real important one to not pay. And there's a variety of other categories, people who don't qualify for programs for certain circumstances. And that might be something, maybe it might be too much for this bill right now, or something maybe to consider for the bill, or to be discussed in the future around these same efforts. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Drazkowski. Senator Gustafson or Senator Kroon, any final thoughts? I don't see any other questions from committee members. Senator Kroon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to thank Senator Gustafson. She's doing really good work navigating all of the various obstacles and issues surrounding a big bill like this, and has done a great job including everybody to really make this bill the best it can possibly be. So just like to thank her on that and thank the committee for your attention to this matter.
Thank you both for your work and teamwork on this. Seeing no further discussion, Senator Gustafson moves that Senate File 856.
Mr. Chair?
Senator.
Did we already adopt the amendment? Oh. I
Yes, we
missed
did.
that.
No further discussion. Senator Gustafson moves that Senate File 856, as amended, is recommended to pass and re-referred to the Rules Committee. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. The motion prevails. Senate File 856, as amended, is recommended to pass and re-referred to the Rules Committee. Thank you, Senator Gustafson. And members, we will have committee tomorrow at noon. And with that, committee is adjourned.